Greed, the shadow of an insecure self. The hunger that never ends. Have you ever felt like, no matter how much you achieve, it's never quite enough? You reach a goal, and for a brief moment, you feel satisfied. But then, almost immediately, something else appears. Another desire, another standard, another version of yourself you think you need to become. And suddenly, what you had is no longer enough. So you keep going. You push harder. You want more. You chase faster. Not because you're greedy, but because something inside you feels incomplete. We often think of greed as something obvious. A wealthy person who still wants more money. A powerful person who refuses to let go of control. Someone who takes more than they need, more than they deserve. But what if greed isn't about having too much? What if it's about feeling like you are never enough? Greed is rarely about the object itself. Money is not the problem. Success is not the problem. Even desire is not the problem. The real question is, why does it never feel like enough? Look closely. A person who feels whole doesn't need to constantly prove their worth. They don't need to compare every step they take. They don't need to collect validation from the outside world. But an insecure self does. It needs reassurance. It needs recognition. It needs something, anything that tells it, you matter, you are valuable, you are enough. And when that feeling doesn't come from within, it starts searching for it outside, through money, through relationships, through achievements, through attention, through anything that can temporarily silence the voice inside that says, you are not enough. That voice is quiet at first, almost unnoticeable. But over time, it grows. And the more you try to silence it with external things, the louder it becomes. So you start chasing more, not because you truly want more, but because you're trying to escape that feeling, that subtle anxiety, that quiet fear, that uncomfortable emptiness you can't quite explain. This is where greed begins, not in abundance, but in insecurity. An insecure self is always calculating. Am I doing enough? Am I successful enough? Am I attractive enough? Do they respect me enough? Do I have enough? And the answer is almost always the same. No, not yet. So you keep going. You tell yourself, when I make more money, I'll feel secure. When I achieve more, I'll feel confident. When I'm loved more, I'll feel complete. But when those things finally happen, the feeling doesn't last. It never does. Because the problem was never the lack of money, or the lack of success, or the lack of love. The problem was the belief that you are not enough without them. And as long as that belief exists, nothing will ever truly satisfy you. This is the paradox of greed. The more you have, the more you fear losing it. The more you achieve, the more pressure you feel to maintain it. The more you depend on external things, the less stable your inner world becomes. It's like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. And yet, from the outside, it can look like strength, ambition, drive, success. But underneath all of that, there's often something fragile, something uncertain, something that is still trying to prove its worth. You see, a secure person can pursue success without losing themselves. But an insecure person often uses success to find themselves. And that changes everything. Because when you use external things to define who you are, you become dependent on them. Your peace becomes conditional. Your confidence becomes unstable. Your sense of self becomes negotiable. And that's where suffering begins. Imagine building your identity on something that can disappear. Money can be lost. Status can fade. People can leave. Trends can change. If your sense of worth is attached to any of these, you will always live with a subtle fear. A fear you might not even recognize. The fear of losing yourself. And so, you hold on tighter. You accumulate more. You control more. You protect more. Not because you are greedy, but because you are afraid. Afraid that without these things, you won't know who you are. This is why greed is not just a behavioral problem. It's an identity problem. It's not about wanting too much. It's about not knowing that you are already enough. And until that changes, the cycle continues. You achieve. You feel good. You lose the feeling. You chase again. Over and over. A loop with no end. But here's the deeper truth. The one most people never stop to consider. What if the thing you are chasing is not something you can ever find outside of yourself? What if no amount of money, no level of success, no relationship, no recognition can ever give you the one thing you're truly looking for? A sense of enoughness. Because enough is not a number. It's not a milestone. It's not a destination. It's a state of being. And if you don't have it now, you won't have it later. Not because you failed, but because you're looking in the wrong place. So the question is not, how can I get more? But rather, why do I feel like I need more to be enough? That question changes everything. In the next part, we'll go deeper. We'll explore where this insecurity comes from, how it forms, and why so many people never escape it. Because once you understand the root, you can finally break the cycle. And maybe, for the first time, you won't need more to feel whole. The origin of insecurity. Where does this feeling come from? This quiet sense that you are not enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not important enough. It doesn't appear overnight. It doesn't suddenly arrive when you become an adult. It begins much earlier. Think back, if you can, to a time when you were younger, before the pressure, before the comparisons, before the constant need to prove yourself. There was a version of you that didn't question your worth. You laughed freely. You expressed yourself without overthinking. You didn't measure your value based on what you had or how others saw you. You simply existed. And that was enough. So what changed? The world happened. As you grew up, you started receiving messages. Some were direct, some were subtle, but all of them slowly shaped the way you see yourself. Be better, try harder. Why can't you be like them? Look at how successful they are. Look at how beautiful they are. Look at how far ahead they are. Comparison was introduced. And once comparison enters your mind, innocence begins to fade. Because now you're no longer just being. You're measuring. Am I better than them? Or worse? Am I ahead? Or behind? Do I have enough? Or am I lacking? And in a world where someone will always have more, you will almost always feel like you are less. This is where insecurity quietly takes root. It doesn't scream. It whispers. You need to improve. You need to catch up. You need to become more. To be enough. At first, this might seem helpful. It pushes you, motivates you, drives you forward. But underneath that motivation, there is a hidden condition. I will be enough. When I succeed, when I'm recognized, when I'm loved, when I achieve something meaningful. And that when becomes your prison, because it keeps moving. You reach one milestone, and another appears. You fix one insecurity, and another replaces it. You prove yourself in one area, and suddenly feel lacking in another. There is always something missing, But the truth is, it was never about those things. The insecurity was already there. Those goals just gave it a direction. And the deeper you go into this cycle, the more your identity becomes tied to external validation. You start defining yourself based on what you achieve, what you own, how people perceive you, how you compare to others. And slowly, without realizing it, you lose connection with who you are without those things. This is why silence feels uncomfortable, why being alone feels heavy, why doing nothing feels like failure. Because when everything external is removed, you are left with yourself. And if your relationship with yourself is unstable, that moment becomes unbearable. So you avoid it. You stay busy. You stay distracted. You keep chasing. Not necessarily because you want more, but because you don't want to feel what's underneath. That emptiness, that uncertainty, that question, who am I? Without all of this, for many people, that question is terrifying because they don't have an answer. And so they build one. They construct an identity, piece by piece, achievement by achievement, approval by approval. I am successful. I am respected. I am admired. I am valuable because of what I have done. And for a while, it works until something shakes it. A failure, a rejection, a loss, a moment where you don't meet expectations. And suddenly, everything feels unstable. Because if your identity is built on what you do, what happens when you can't do it anymore? If your worth depends on success, what happens when you fail? If your value comes from others' approval, what happens when they stop giving it? This is the hidden fragility of an insecure self. It looks strong, but it is deeply dependent. And that dependency fuels greed. Because when your sense of self is unstable, you will constantly try to reinforce it with more success, more recognition, more control, more accumulation. Not because you are selfish, but because you are trying to feel safe. This is important to understand. Greed is not always about taking from others. Sometimes, it is about trying to protect yourself. Protect yourself from feeling small, from feeling invisible, from feeling like you don't matter. So you gather more, not to enjoy it, but to defend against that feeling. And the more you rely on external things to feel secure, the more you need them. Because deep down, you still don't trust yourself. You don't trust that you are enough, as you are. And that lack of trust is the real root of insecurity. Not failure, not lack of success, not lack of opportunity, but disconnection from yourself. You were not born insecure. You learned it through comparison, through expectation, through conditional love, through a world that constantly tells you, you need to be more. And over time, you believed it. So now, even when you have enough, it doesn't feel like it. Because the feeling of enough was never built. Only the habit of not enough. And that habit is what drives the cycle of greed. But here's the turning point. If insecurity is learned, it can also be unlearned. Not by forcing yourself to be confident, not by pretending everything is fine, not by achieving more, but by reconnecting with yourself, by questioning the beliefs you've been carrying, by noticing the patterns you've been repeating, by becoming aware of the voice inside your head, instead of blindly obeying it. Because once you see it clearly, you begin to separate from it. You realize that voice is not you. That insecurity is not your identity. That emptiness is not a permanent truth. It is just something you've been conditioned to feel. And what is learned can be undone. In the next part, we will go even deeper. we will explore how greed silently controls your decisions, your relationships, and your entire direction in life. Because most people don't even realize how much of their life is being driven by something they've never questioned. The invisible control. Have you ever made a decision and later wondered why? Not just what you chose, but what truly drove you to choose it. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. They think, I decide what I want. I choose my path. I know what matters to me. But what if that's not entirely true? What if many of your choices are not coming from clarity, but from insecurity? Not obvious insecurity, not the kind you openly admit, but the quiet, hidden kind that operates beneath your awareness. Because insecurity doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like ambition, working endlessly, not because you love the work, but because you're afraid of falling behind. Saying yes to everything, not because you truly want to, but because you're afraid of disappointing others. Staying in relationships, not because they fulfill you, but because you're afraid of being alone. Chasing success, not because it excites you, but because you need to prove something. From the outside, these behaviors can look admirable, disciplined, dedicated, driven. But inside, there is tension, pressure, fear, a constant need to maintain something fragile. This is how greed becomes invisible. It's no longer just about money or possessions. It becomes a pattern of living, a way of thinking, a way of choosing, a way of existing. You don't just want more things, you want more certainty, more validation, more control over how life unfolds. Because uncertainty feels dangerous. When your sense of self is unstable, uncertainty feels like a threat. So you try to control everything: your future, your image, how others perceive you. But control is an illusion. No matter how much you plan, life remains unpredictable. And when reality doesn't match your expectations, the insecurity returns, stronger. So you try harder, you push more, you tighten your grip, you become even more attached to outcomes. This is where suffering deepens, because now your peace depends on things you cannot control. You feel good when things go your way. You feel anxious when they don't. You feel confident when you succeed. You feel worthless when you fail. Your inner state becomes unstable because it is constantly reacting to the external world. And without realizing it, you become trapped, not by circumstances, but by your own patterns. You begin to live in a constant state of almost satisfied, almost secure, almost at peace, but never quite there. And so, you keep chasing more achievement, more recognition, more experiences, more everything, hoping that the next thing will finally be enough. But it never is, because the problem was never the lack of more, it was the dependence on it. Let's look deeper. Imagine two people. Both are successful. Both have money, status, opportunities. But internally, they are very different. The first person feels grounded. They enjoy what they have. They pursue goals, but are not defined by them. They can succeed without losing themselves, and they can fail without collapsing. The second person looks similar on the outside, but inside, it's different. Every success feels temporary. Every failure feels personal. Every comparison feels threatening. Every loss feels like a piece of their identity is gone. So they keep accumulating, not out of joy, but out of fear. This is the difference between using success and depending on it. And most people don't realize which one they are doing, Because society rewards the second type, the one who never stops, the one who always wants more, the one who is never satisfied. We call it ambition. We admire it. We celebrate it. But we rarely question it. We don't ask, what is driving this? Is it inspiration? Or is it insecurity? Because those two can look almost identical, but feel completely different. One comes from wholeness. The other comes from lack. One expands your life. The other consumes it. And if you're not aware, you can spend your entire life chasing something that was never going to fulfill you. This is how greed silently shapes your life. It influences the career you choose, the relationships you stay in, the goals you prioritize, the way you see yourself. It even shapes your definition of success. Because if your definition of success is rooted in insecurity, no amount of achievement will ever satisfy you. You will always move the goalpost, always demand more from yourself, always feel like you're not quite there yet. And that constant pressure becomes your normal. You wake up with it. You carry it through the day. You fall asleep with it. A quiet tension that never fully goes away. But here's the truth most people avoid. If you don't question what's driving you, you will be controlled by it. Not consciously, but unconsciously. And unconscious patterns are the hardest to break because you don't even see them. So everything feels like a choice, when in reality, it's a reaction to fear, a reaction to insecurity, a reaction to a belief that you are not enough. And as long as that belief remains unchallenged, it will continue to shape your life. But the moment you begin to see it, everything changes. You start to notice why you say yes when you want to say no, why you chase things that don't truly matter to you, why you feel restless even when everything seems fine. You begin to separate yourself from the patterns, and in that space, something new becomes possible. Choice, real choice, not driven by fear, not driven by lack, but driven by awareness. And that is where freedom begins. In the next part, we will explore how to break this cycle, not through force, not through denial, but through understanding and a deeper shift in how you relate to yourself. Because once you stop being controlled by insecurity, you no longer need greed to feel whole. Breaking the cycle. If greed is driven by insecurity, and insecurity is rooted in a belief that you are not enough, then the question becomes, how do you break free? Not by forcing yourself to want less, not by rejecting success, not by pretending you don't care. Because suppression is not freedom. You can try to convince yourself, I don't need anything, I'm fine with less, I've let go. But if that comes from resistance, it's just another form of control. True freedom doesn't come from pushing desire away. It comes from understanding it. So instead of asking, how do I stop being greedy? Ask, what is my greed trying to protect me from? Because greed is not random. It is a response to fear, a response to emptiness, a response to a deeper wound that hasn't been fully seen. And unless you understand that wound, you will keep repeating the same pattern. So let's slow down. The next time you feel the urge to chase something, pause, not to stop yourself, but to observe. Ask yourself, what am I really looking for right now? Is it money? Or is it security? Is it success? Or is it validation? Is it love? Or is it a fear of being alone? Because often, what you think you want is not the real answer. It's just the surface. Underneath every strong desire, there is a feeling you are trying to reach, a sense of safety, a sense of worth. a sense of being enough. And here's the shift. What if you stopped chasing the object and started understanding the feeling? Because the object is external, but the feeling is internal. And anything internal cannot be permanently fulfilled by something external. This is where awareness becomes powerful. When you start to see your patterns clearly, you create space. Space between the urge and your reaction. And in that space, you are no longer controlled. You can choose differently. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you finally see what is happening. This is the beginning of breaking the cycle. But awareness alone is not enough. You also need to rebuild your relationship with yourself. Because at the core of insecurity is disconnection. You don't trust yourself. You don't feel safe with yourself. You don't believe you are enough without something extra. So naturally, you look outside. To rebuild that connection, you have to start where you are. Not with who you think you should be. Not with who the world tells you to become. But with who you actually are, right now. This means learning to sit with yourself, without distraction, without escape, without constantly reaching for something else. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. You may notice restlessness, thoughts that won't stop, feelings you've been avoiding. That's okay. That discomfort is not a problem. It's information. It's showing you what has been there all along, waiting to be seen, instead of running from it. Stay with it, not to fix it, not to change it, but simply to understand it. Because the more you understand yourself, the less you need to escape yourself. And the less you need to escape yourself, the less you will chase things to fill that space. This is how greed begins to dissolve. Not through discipline, not through control, but through clarity, through seeing that what you've been chasing was never really what you needed. And at the same time, you begin to build something new, a sense of self that is not dependent on external things, a sense of worth that does not fluctuate with success or failure, a sense of stability that does not collapse when life changes. This doesn't mean you stop wanting things. You can still have goals, still pursue success, still build, create, and achieve. But now, it comes from a different place. Not from lack, but from wholeness. You no longer chase to prove yourself. You move because you want to express yourself. There is no pressure to become someone else, because you are no longer trying to fix a broken identity. You are simply exploring what is possible, and that changes everything. Because now, success becomes something you experience, not something you depend on. Money becomes a tool, not a measure of your worth. Relationships become connections, not sources of validation. And life becomes lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because your sense of self is no longer fragile. You are no longer constantly trying to hold everything together. You can let things come. You can let things go, without losing yourself in the process. This is what it means to be free from greed. Not having nothing, not wanting nothing, but not needing anything. To feel whole. And from that place, something unexpected happens. Gratitude becomes natural, not forced. Not practiced as a technique, but felt, because when you are no longer focused on what is missing, you begin to see what is already here. And what is already here is often more than enough. In the final part, we will bring everything together. We will explore what it truly means to live without being driven by insecurity, not as an idea, but as a way of being. Living without the need for more. What does it actually mean? To live without being driven by the need for more? Not in theory, not as an idea, but in real life. because it's easy to understand these concepts and still fall back into the same patterns. So what changes when you are no longer controlled by insecurity? At first, nothing dramatic. Your life may look almost the same from the outside. You still work. You still pursue goals. You still interact with the world. But internally, everything is different. The pressure is gone, not because you have less responsibility, but because your identity is no longer tied to the outcome. You can give your full effort without attaching your worth to the result. You can succeed without feeling superior. You can fail without feeling diminished, because your sense of self is no longer fragile. It is not something you constantly have to defend. This changes the way you make decisions. Before, many of your choices were driven by fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of falling behind. Fear of not being enough. Now, your choices come from clarity. You ask, do I actually want this? Does this align with who I am? Or am I just trying to prove something? And for the first time, you are honest with yourself. You stop saying yes when everything inside you says no. You stop chasing things that don't truly matter to you. You stop building a life that looks good from the outside, but feels empty on the inside. This also transforms your relationship with success. Success is no longer something you chase to complete yourself. It becomes something you create as an expression of yourself. You are no longer trying to fill a void. You are sharing something that is already whole. And because of that, your work changes. It becomes more intentional, more authentic, more aligned. You are not constantly reacting. You are creating. This also affects your relationship with others. When you are insecure, relationships often become a source of validation. You need people to reassure you, to confirm your worth, to make you feel seen. And without realizing it, this creates pressure. You expect others to give you something that you have not given yourself. But when you no longer depend on others to feel complete, everything shifts. You can be with someone without needing them to define you. You can care deeply without becoming attached in a way that creates fear. You can love without trying to control, because you are not using the relationship to escape yourself. You are simply sharing your life with another person. There is no hidden demand, no silent expectation, just presence. And that kind of connection is rare. It is not built on need. It is built on freedom. This is what happens when you are no longer driven by greed. You are no longer trying to take from life. You are participating in it fully, without constantly asking, what can I get? Instead, you begin to ask, what can I experience? What can I create? What can I give? And strangely, this is when life starts to feel more abundant. Not because you have more, but because you are no longer focused on what is missing. Your attention changes, and where your attention goes, your experience follows. You begin to notice things you used to overlook. Simple moments, quiet clarity, a sense of ease you didn't have before. Nothing extraordinary, but deeply fulfilling. Because for the first time, you are not rushing past your life, trying to get somewhere else. You are here, and here is enough. This doesn't mean you will never feel insecure again. Old patterns may still appear. Old thoughts may still return. But now, you see them. And because you see them, you are not controlled by them. You can pause. You can question. You can choose. And that is the difference. Freedom is not the absence of patterns. It is the ability to not be ruled by them. So when the urge to chase more arises, You don't immediately follow it. You ask, what is this really about? And sometimes, you will still choose to pursue it. But now, you do it consciously, not as a reaction, but as a choice. And that changes the entire experience. Because now, you are no longer trying to become enough. You are living as enough. There is nothing to prove, nothing to defend, nothing to complete. Only something to experience, to explore, to express. And from that place, life becomes something entirely different. Not a race, not a competition, not a constant effort to measure up, but a process, a movement, a quiet unfolding of who you already are. And maybe that was the point all along, not to become more, but to realize you were never lacking. Thank you for staying through this journey, and maybe now you can begin your own. What do you think about this? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming content.